Good afternoon, everyone. It's Wale Oladipo here. Welcome to our question and answer session. Um, it's wonderful to be able to have this time. I'm Wale, by the way. If some of you are just joining us for the first time, if you've not seen my face before, I'm the lead trainer for the Mind Body Breakthrough Organization. We specialize in helping people to understand anxiety, stress, and trauma related conditions better. So we run workshops, consultations, and different seminars across the United Kingdom. We have a number of trainers that help us to do that. I'm the lead trainer and psychotherapist. It's a huge pleasure to be with you today. We face big problems in our societies today. And one of the problems that we face is the coronavirus epidemic that we don't even know how to deal with it. The human mind is going through an unprecedented time with regards to our mental health. The overall public global consciousness is experiencing huge anxiety situation at the moment, and that's one of the things that we were thinking at Mind Body Breakthrough and looking for different ways to help people to understand their mind better, to look for different ways to be able to cope with regards to the problems that we face right now. Anxiety, if you have pre-existing conditions, you realize that your anxiety is getting stronger, your OCD is going crazy. And it's like, how can we help ourselves to regulate? How can we help each other to calm down and to access that state of mind that embraces relaxation? We cannot deny it. The situation we face at the moment warrants your survival center to work a bit harder. But if you have some existing conditions and mental health issues, you are especially vulnerable at the moment. Now, the purpose of this question and answer session is to be able, first of all, is to very quickly look into how stress, how trauma, how the problems that we face affect brain functions, and how the different regions of the brain that are being changed as a result of the overexposure to our traumatic events can have how they can affect our emotions and push through exaggerated symptoms, somatic symptoms, anxious symptoms. So that is that. More and more people are joining us, and I'm having to add more people. We have a whole bunch of latecomers that will not join on time. So that is that. Okay. Now we're going to, if you have questions, just post your questions on the live chat. I'm going to be looking through the questions and we're going to be answering them. We'll have a good go. Also, I want to start off by just covering the basics, especially the neuroscience of anxiety, of stress, with regards to our brain functions. So very quickly, I want to show you a little picture of a brain, and I'm going to talk around that while you're thinking about your questions. A little picture about the brain, and we're going to very quickly look through that, and we'll get started. I'm sure you could see my screen. If you can see my screen, just say yes, I can. Just type yes, so give me a nod. If you're yes, good. Thank you. I can see some nodding going on there. Excellent. Now look at this. This is a very simple brain image, and there's an advantage here because it's already giving you some things that some functionality with regards to brain function. So look at this, the brain. What we do know is that trauma or chronic stress exposures that we face in our life affect brain function. Studies have shown that the brain reacts to psychological pain like trauma, like a chronic stress, like negative life events that we face, it reacts to psychological stress the same way it reacts to physical pain. In other words, if you bruise your elbow, the brain is going to mount up a pro-inflammatory mobilization of cytokines, of natural killer cells that will go into the site of the injury to protect the site, and also to make sure that the the healing process is initiated. And it's the same thing that the brain actually does if you go through psychological issues. So there is a whole cascade of pro-inflammatory mobilization that goes into entire brain and body. Is actually even more complex. And what happens is that when we are stressed, when we have stressors in our environment that are extremely strong, especially think what we're going through right now, coronavirus, that could actually inundate the brain, especially if you've had some pre-existing anxiety or mental health psychopathological issues before we get into this situation. I'm talking about the inflammation. If the inflammation is already high at that moment, added stressors will compromise our immune system functions. So the immune system will not be able to help us to protect ourselves from foreign invaders. Rather, we are susceptible to even further injuries, such as it could be inflammation-based conditions. But what are we saying this? We're saying that for us to actually look at the whole issue of mental health, we have to consider it holistically. Holistically, consideration is extremely powerful. But first of all, let's look at this brain function, that this brain image that I've just put it for us. By the way, just bear with me a moment. We might have some people who are wanting to join us. Just a moment, please. Yes, I think we're good. We're good. Yes, we're good. So we do know that we have 3 levels of the brain. According to studies conducted by Paul MacLean, MD, Paul MacLean, documented in the classic work known as the triune brain in evolution, the triune brain in evolution, the 3 brains in evolution. Now, the first brain that we had was called the brainstem, or the old brain, or the reptilian brain. And the old brain specializes in survival. So when there's a stress in the environment and your fight to flight nervous system is activated, at that moment, you have regressed into your survival brain that is in charge of survival activities. And we have the middle part of the brain that is known as the limbic system, or the emotional brain. This is the part of the brain that helps us to regulate our emotional activities. That's the emotional brain. That's the part of the brain that helps us to bond with our sense of self, and also helps us to bond with other people around us. But what we do know is that the limbic system is broken down when we've been overly exposed to stress. So that means inside the limbic system, that's where the stress chemicals are initiated. The stress chemicals here is your cortisol and your adrenaline. They do not finish there, but they are initiated there in the hypothalamic center. I'm going to show you where the hypothalamus is. Yes, that's right there. The hypothalamus is in charge of our homeostatic regulation. So that is the chemical factory where the stress chemicals production will start from. It doesn't finish there. We'll have to go to your pituitary gland, then to your adrenal glands, to eventually produce your cortisol or your adrenaline. Now, the entire midbrain is extremely susceptible to environmental stressors. And neuroimaging studies have shown that there is increased in the entire limbic system activities when we are overly stressed. So what does that mean to me? It means that this little guy right there, right here, this little guy right here, I'm sure you can see my screen, the amygdala. That is the security officer. That is the guy that fires a fight or flight reaction. And it's part of your limbic system. So the amygdala works a little bit too hard when the stressors in our environment are very, very intense. Now, studies have also shown that if you experience early childhood trauma, the amygdala volume within your emotional brain might be a little bit bigger than the normal volume of the amygdala in the general population. Why? Because that is the part of the brain you've used a lot. So any part of the brain you've used the most will enlarge. Any part of the brain you don't use at all will start to shrink. It's known as neuropruning, just like you're pruning your garden. There's no capability for laziness with regards to the neurons in the brain. If you're not using them, if they are not being used, they will be pruned. And if you're using a particular region of the brain a lot, just like, for instance, with regards to anxiety and trauma, the amygdala system is overactive. Then that means the amygdala system will have to recruit more neurons into that part of you. And you feel that in your body as exaggerated somatic symptoms. It's possible to shrink back the amygdala system, but it's not easy. It's not something that happens overnight. We have to send constant relaxation signals to the entire brain and body until the headquarters for our survival, which is the brainstem, start to downgrade or downregulate our threat level. Just like at the moment, where we're having a lot of issues with the coronavirus. And I remember listening to Nicola Sturgeon, the first minister of Scotland, about 10 days ago or so, and she was saying something very, very important with regards to making sure that all the shops are closed, or the shops are closed, unless you're selling something that is essential, that is connected to the survival of our people against the coronavirus. For example, foods and medicines. Now, that rings a bell to me because that is how the brain will operate. Now, if you're faced with a huge stress in your environment, the blood flow activities are no longer even. So the brain will start to ration the essential resources. It will allocate more funding to the regions of the brain that are directly connected to your survival, and it will cut funding in those regions of the brain that are not directly responsible for survival. For example, your amygdala is directly responsible for survival, so it gets more funding. They recruit more workers, and it increases in volume, and that translates to the micromanagement of your own mind and body. So you have more security officers that are micromanaging your brain and your body, your emotions, your bodily sensations. So that is how you feel anxious. You feel different, different types of symptoms of anxiety, of depression, of PTSD, depending on some pre-existing traumatic events that we've had. Now, look at the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, which is supposed to be the leader of consciousness. Unfortunately, it's not directly involved in your survival activities. In fact, once your survival brain kicks in, your thinking brain goes offline. Yes, because the survival brain has the audacity to hijack awareness, because it's better safe than sorry. So you realize that you cannot think properly because all your executive functions are elevated from the PFC center. So you can't think properly. You cannot connect with your genius. You can't even, interpret simple emotions to be able to connect with the pains of other people because you're preoccupied with survival. So all the executive functions are inundated. They are actually under-resourced. They will not be able to perform properly until we start to optimize our brain functions. Now, we might not be able to have controls over what is coming towards us, over the challenges of life that we face right now, especially the coronavirus epidemic, but we can control our own self-regulatory system. We can choose to ensure that we are not in survival. And that is important. If you deliberately every single day nurture your brain with relaxation, you will increase the capacity of brain resilience to be able to regulate your emotions properly. And that is some of the things that I want to actually, the foundation that I want to lay before we start to take some questions. It's possible to reduce the amygdala activity at this time, at this time of very uncertainty. It's possible also to boost more blood flow to the PFC so that even though the challenges are strong, but our own resolution to activate our healing center, our parasympathetic nervous system, is as strong as ever. And we're going to be talking about it. Now we have the hippocampus. Look at the hippocampus right here. That is involved in memory. That is the memory center. The memory suffers when we produce too much cortisol, which is the primary hormone for our stress. So your hippocampus can no longer does not have enough energy to be able to encode memory and to access the filing cabinets within his department. Also, studies have shown that your hippocampus is connected. It has very strong pathway to your PFC right here. Your PFC. And your PFC helps you to stop fear and anxiety. Actually, the PFC is supposed to regulate the amygdala center right here, so that the amygdala doesn't go crazy on you and start to micromanage you using excess stress chemicals. So the PFC is connected to the memory center so that it could dampen down some amygdala advances by just going through your previous memory units to see whether the threats you are actually facing right now, maybe it's not actually a live threat. Maybe it's a false alarm. So your PFC needs access to the pre-recorded, pre-stored memories in the hippocampus to quickly go through the scan, the computer database, to ensure that the amygdala is not just firing all the time. But once the hippocampus is compromised because of the too much stress chemicals that we are exposed to when we face chronic stress, so that means the hippocampus shrinks. It doesn't have enough gray matter to be able to process the tremendous amounts of energy and information that it has to process. And also, studies have shown that there's a disconnection between the PFC and your hippocampus. So the PFC cannot extinguish fear, conditioned fear, as well as unconditioned fear. So the only thing that happens to you is that the amygdala that measures the tones and intensity of your emotions start to go crazy all the time. It can sense the discrepancies, the changes in your feelings, in your emotions, and the amygdala measures that to be able to prepare you for a fight or flight experience. But how can we re-nurture the amygdala? How can we make sure that constantly, especially at this time, we have what it takes to constantly generate relaxation to the amygdala system, to the hippocampus system, to the brainstem, to be able for them to renegotiate our threat levels. If the threat levels have been set very high, we can renegotiate for it to be calibrated to a chest level, high, a chest level, or even lower. And that is what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be answering those questions as we look at some questions. So let me just look at I'll look at some questions to see whether some of you have asked some questions right here. Okay, good. So if you have any specific question It's time now to post the questions as we as we continue to. I'm just going to log in into this particular computer. We have some questions already coming through here. Okay, so there's a question here. How do I work with a client who has now focused her OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, on contamination of coronavirus? How do I work with a client who has now focused OCD on contamination of coronavirus instead of her usual obsessive thoughts? Now, we do know that obsessive compulsive disorder, it's a brain-driven condition that studies have shown to be very distinct from a non-OCD brain. An OCD brain is totally different from a non-OCD brain. So it's brain-driven, it's not will-driven. You cannot blame it on your inability to be able to control it. You can't even blame it on personality because it's not about personality. There are distinct neurological structures and functions that neuroimaging studies have identified in OCD brains. So what we're looking at two things. OCD has some genetic predispositions to it. So that means OCD runs in families. We could inherit OCD. Also, studies have shown that trauma is connected to obsessive compulsive disorder. In fact, some papers, some peer-reviewed papers, especially there's some more. There's some that have just come out very recently. There's one that's just in my mind right now. The prize, the prize 2009, 2010 prize, and I will post it to you guys. There's a particular paper that I've just read recently, and it's talked about the post-traumatic OCD. Post-traumatic OCD. So that means in that paper they're showing that OCD could be a defense. It could be a coping mechanism for our traumatic past. What does that mean to me? It means that most OCD tendencies are left brain dissociation. Now we have two hemispheres of the brain. But possibly this could help some of you. We have the two hemispheres of the brain, and we have the left hemisphere that specializes in logic, in language, in linear, and all the L's, list. And we have the right hemisphere of the brain that specializes in emotions. Now, most of the unresolved traumatic memories are processed, and also they're processed from the right hemisphere apparatuses, all the regions, including the amygdala, the right amygdala, the right hippocampus, the right temporal lobe, and different other regions of the brain in the right hemisphere. They combine together to process unresolved emotions. Now, OCD is hugely left brain dissociation. So it occupies your left logic, rational center, so much that you don't have time to have access to the right hemisphere of the brain that possibly contains your unresolved, unprocessed emotions. So studies are showing that OCD could be a defense. Now, with regards to this question, if you look at it from that perspective, you realize that OCD requires to increase its intensity when you have added stressors in your environment. It will take on more workers. It will take on more possibilities. So a client that has limited his OCD to obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors could eventually widen the scope of the ego defense to bring in the greatest fear that consumes the human mind the most at the moment, coronavirus. So you realize that as a way of trying to protect your own psyche, you become even more preoccupied with the latest fear in town. And that is very, very That is very natural because we are built for survival. Your entire brain and body is wired for survival. Now, one thing that we need to look into is to look beyond the coping mechanism. Look beyond the OCD. There's something behind. There's something underneath that the OCD is trying to numb you from. So we go deeper to be able to help that person with regards to whatever emotions and whatever non-integrated emotions and feelings that the brain has not been able to come to terms with. So even though we have the OCD at the outer layer of defense, there's something that OCD is numbing away from us. And we can help people, we can validate people, we can witness them, we can help them move through the emotions that they face. And before you know it, you realize that the OCD tendencies are decreasing. At this time also, increasing your serotonin levels through exercise, through gratitude, through meditation can actually reduce your OCD tendencies. Studies have shown that the neurotransmitter that is implicated in OCD tendencies, OCD, is serotonin. So if you increase the serotonin levels naturally, constant exercise, don't over-exercise, just exercise normally. And also meditation. Studies have shown that meditation boosts the blood flow to the brain. It makes the CEO of the brain to come to work, to come on site, to make the PFC, to get more funding, more resources so that it could modulate your amygdala center. So I hope that is useful there. Let me just see whether we have other questions right here. Now, somebody's saying that there's a question here. You talk about relaxation to renegotiate 3 levels. What specific exercises do you recommend? Now, with regards to sending relaxation signals to the entire brain and body so that the survival brain can downgrade or downregulate our anxiety threats levels. There are a whole bunch of relaxation exercise, even first of all, by just breathing well, by just breathing normally, breathing deeply. Do you know that if you hold your breath for too long, as some of us who've been traumatized can easily do, we do that subconsciously, by the way. If you hold your breath too long, your body is going to send a panic signal to your brain that you are in danger. You know, your survival brain has no rational capability. It can't rationalize. It has to regress back to the hardwired autopilot survival mechanism, and it's going to have to call your fight or flight. But if you just remembering to breathe, you know, making sure that you have enough oxygen, your brain has enough oxygen, your body has enough oxygen through deep belly breathing. And even if you can also have 2 or 3 affirmations that you use to re-nurture the amygdala, that would be great. And one of them is something like, I feel afraid. You could say something like, I feel afraid, but I'm not in danger. It's okay to recognize the fact that this is a very, very difficult time. We feel afraid all the time. We don't want to contract the virus. We don't want to be infected. So understanding that you feel afraid is something that is very, very powerful. Then you bring the next statement, I'm not in danger. But your amygdala has a language. It doesn't hear your voice, so to say, unless the voice is attached to the right feelings. That is why you have to regulate your breathing. Breathing is an authorization for a downgrade with regards to your threat levels. But we have to do that constantly, constant enough. It has to be constant enough. We have to pass the law of repetition for us to be able to eventually start to recondition the anxiety center. The symptoms that you face right now, they are natural. They are a natural state. If something is going on in your environment, just like the coronavirus, you expect your anxiety center to be a little bit overactivated. That is a natural state. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people cannot work. A lot of people cannot connect. One of the most powerful healing activities in human species, connection, community, and connection. We can no longer do that. A lot of families can see their loved ones, and a lot of people are dying. Bereavement is one of the most tragic, traumatic events that we face in life, especially the nature of death and the untimeliness of the death. So people are going through stuff that warrant your anxiety center to work a bit harder. So you just have to acknowledge that the symptoms, the somatic symptoms that we face, we see, we experience, those are legitimate symptoms of this day, of this time that we face. But your own counter activity, we have to be relaxation. So you can breathe, you can meditate, you can connect with nature, you can walk. Meditation, especially at this time, is very, very crucial, especially early in the morning. If you want, before you go today, I'm going to do some meditation with you. If that is not weird for your mind. So if you like, I could record that and send it to you to be a starting point. Just listen to that every day. You will be surprised, especially if you start your day by instructing over 50 trillion cells in your body that what you want to experience today is relaxation. They will listen. You'll be surprised that even all the other problems that you face, or the relationship issues and all the other unexpected issues that might come towards you that day, you realize that you navigate them a lot better than you used to. Why? Because there's an intention. You've set an intention to the entire brain system that and at the cellular level that is what you want to experience. So doing that every day for at least 21 days. 21 days. The first 21 days is very crucial. You realize that gradually you reduce your anxiety levels. When you feel anxious, you feel palpitations, you feel tingling, you feel dizzy, you feel as if you can think, mental blankness, all those things. Oh, they are part of the activities of the hyperactive amygdala system that is responding to the problems that we face in our environment. So don't exaggerate it. Rather, speak the language of the amygdala, of the anxiety center, which is relaxation. Now, one thing that's very crucial is that when you say your affirmation, say them on the out breath. That's very powerful. So you take a deep breath, then you say something. You always say something on your out breath because your out breath is connected to your parasympathetic nervous system, your healing center. So always speak on your out breaths whenever you're having tension, you're anxious. Those a lot of people who are into powerful negotiation, who are into negotiation, conflict management, have been trained in this way. They know how to breathe. The best breather is the last one standing. The best breather is the last one standing. Other people have had a panic attack. Oh, they've hit somebody and the police has arrested them. But the best breather is the last one standing. You want to be the last one standing. Even breathing properly strengthens your immune system function. It reduces your cortisol level and you optimize brain function. So that is that. Now, there's one other question right here. It says, I've started addictive behaviors such as overexercise, disordered eating. So is that all? Okay, that's all. That's no any other one there. So addictive behavior, as I've mentioned, fortunately, I started off with that. Addictions are nothing but defenses. They are a defense. Nobody wants to be addicted to anything. The brain actually gravitates you towards addiction if that is the only way to give you a breather, to give you some kind of a respite, to make you to be able to be shielded away from the unbearable repressed emotions that we've not been able to face over the years. So an addiction, almost every single addiction that we have today, are serving a purpose. They have a personality within the psyche, and the purpose is actually to help you. But they are destructive because they have no rational ability to differentiate between what is destructive or not. Just like you use assertiveness as a defense, assertiveness, at the office, not post coronavirus, of course. You get to the office, there's always somebody that is overly assertive. It's a defense because they don't want you to enter a particular territory in their life. So they've put up the defense, and assertiveness is one of the what is known as the most advanced defense mechanisms because it is culturally acceptable. Now, if you choose to drink too much, that is destructive, and the society kind of frowns on that because it has negative consequences. But both the assertiveness and you drinking too much or you doing drugs, they are all protecting something. They're making sure that we're not that vulnerable again to be traumatized or to be humiliated or to be overwhelmed with our repressed emotions. So what I would say is that look past the addiction right now and ask yourself the question, what am I running away from? What emotions am I running away from? What traumatic past I've not been able to reconcile with? I need to get help. In fact, a lot of organizations who help people in this area will look at the addiction. If they do the right job, if they follow the right order, they look at the addiction and they say, well, we have to deal with the addiction first before we can actually take you in and help you at a deeper level. That makes sense because addictions are the outer layer, very strong layer of defense that until we start to take them off, we can't gain access to the repressed emotions they're trying to numb. So it's always good. I will advise you, if you're still listening to me, you have to come out of hiding. Come out of hiding and accept that you have an addiction. And see whether there's a group around you. You can never know before you, if you don't search, you never know that there's a particular organization, a group that helps people specifically to challenge the addiction that you have. And if you feel it's an addiction that is not like an addiction that everybody thinks, but it's bothering you, perhaps something that you could shift yourself, but you have to be open to process repressed emotions. The repressed emotions that the addiction is numbing. There's always an underlying traumatic event for an addiction to be able to take hold. We are creatures of habit, but not of addictions. Addictions, they serve a psychic role within our mental health. And once we process the emotions they're trying to protect, we can easily break the habit. But unless the repressed emotions are fully processed and shifted, they will be hanging around there. We struggle to be able to shift it. So hopefully that helps. That's one question here. If lack of oxygen to the brain increases symptoms and corona decreases oxygen, how about the implication of mental health with corona? Of course, oxygen is critical to life. Oxygen is critical to life. Whatever reduces the oxygenated cerebral blood flow is reducing the capability of human life. So if you don't have enough oxygen is, for example, the neurons, the entire neurons in the brain, they have two foods that they cannot do without: oxygen and glucose. Oxygen and glucose. Those two fuel, they are delivered through the circulatory system, your blood flow. That's why blood flow is key. If your brain is not getting enough oxygen or is enough blood flow, basically because of the overactivation of the survival center that is diverting most of the resources to the survival activities, then you have issues. You have more anxiety. And if coronavirus is it's reducing oxygen to the brain, or the oxygen to the body. We have issues as well. Of course, the coronavirus has other things that it does uh, that eventually kind of, incapacitate our ability to breathe. And that's because of the high inflammation profile that it causes. And of course, a lot of people that die eventually die because of the what is known as the friendly fires. Our own endogenous killer cells eventually turn against us because the effects of the coronavirus has brought about so much inflammation that the well guarded um, areas, regions of the body, even of the bowel, could be compromised easily. So leading to what is known as the leaky gut, or the leaky or leaky, pancreas or whatever syndrome, that could eventually allow the toxins to go to different places they're not supposed to. Then your natural killer cells we have to react. So eventually, we know that the coronavirus situation, we don't know a lot about it yet, but a few that we know that it has other things that it does for us. But the oxygen is key to existence, breathing. The future belongs to the breather. The future belongs to the breather. That's very, very profound. Very, very profound. So how can we ensure that we are not overwhelmed totally with our own issue? Let me just check whether we have some other questions coming in right here. There's one question here. And this question is about childhood trauma and how that has affected the person. And the person also struggling with being married to a narcissist. And because of that, that is slowing down the recovery rate. Of course, those are two big things. Studies have shown that childhood trauma has the greatest, the most severe PTSD symptoms that you can ever, compared to if your trauma happened in adulthood. So, and we do know that complex PTSD is extremely connected to childhood adverse adverse situations that we've gone through. So complex trauma, especially from childhood, affects the entire brain function. Now, with regards to eventually falling into the hands of someone who could take advantage of our broken fight response, because that's very common. Your fight response, your ability to be able to defend yourself, is subdued, is broken if your trauma happens in childhood. Because as a child does not have the capability to blame the parent. For example, a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, they can't. It's against the law of survival, because the survival of that little child depends on the primary caregiver. But if the primary caregiver in this example becomes the source of the trauma for that child becomes disorganized, it becomes confused. That's what the attachment theorist, John Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth, helped us to understand. So that child eventually maladapt. Why? Because it cannot move away from the primary caregiver, because that violates the law of survival of children. But at the same time, it cannot move towards the primary caregiver. So what does that mean? He's confused. If you watch those kids, you realize that the studies. I follow the research of Professor Aaron McCrory of University College London, specializing in the neuroscience of childhood malnutrition, maladaptation, or maltreatments rather. And what studies have found is that the brain might not be able to develop to the maximum, especially the HPA axis. The HPA axis, I'm sure you've heard that before. This is interesting. I think I've got a picture right here to be able to share the HPA axis situation with you. If this is the first time that you have an access here, I will share this with you. the HB axis, right? Look at this. This is interesting. Now, the HB axis is the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. This is the hypothalamic center right here. That is the chemical factory. That's where the stress chemicals are regulated from. The hypothalamic center will produce a peptide that is known as CRH, corticotrophic releasing hormone. Then the CRH rather, will go into the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland will use the materials that are collected from the hypothalamic center, this CRH, to make another neuropeptide known as ACTH, adrenal corticotrophic hormone. And the ACTH will get to the adrenal glands, and that will now finalize the production of cortisol. Now, this particular axis is crucial to your responsiveness adequately to stress. Studies have shown that childhood trauma will dysregulate the HB axis. So that means your emotional regulatory system can't function properly. And that comes across as a way of not being able to defend yourself, being overly dependent on others, but at the same time cannot trust others and can't be soothed by others. So it's a very complex situation. That is why children being abused, going through problems, is probably one of the the most grueling offenses. Because even if you start out in life on a normal level playing field, it's hard enough. Never mind, let alone you starting off very, very badly. So because of that, you realize that your relationship will have issues. Complex traumatic stress is connected to childhood maltreatment, and complex traumatic stress is also characterized by problems handling emotions and in relationships, excessive mood swings. So that means you have issues in relationship. Now, there's a particular phenomenon that trauma researchers have called the compulsion to repeat, or the repetition compulsion. So that is the psychic ability of someone who's been traumatized to continue to recreate their traumatic stories throughout their life. It doesn't stop until there's a proper long-term psychotherapeutic program that eventually helps people to metabolize their traumatic experiences properly. In this time that we have added pressure with the coronavirus, we even feel our PTSD symptoms a lot harder. So because of the compulsion to repeat, we are more likely to be attracting people that will be maintaining the dysregulated HB axis that has been created from the past. So being attracted to a narcissist is something that's very common. In fact, people recreate the initial relationship all the time. If my initial relationship from childhood with primary caregivers is dysfunctional, studies have shown that we recreate the same pattern throughout our lifetime, unless that is broken and there's deeper work involved. But almost nobody has time, no money. So there are a lot of things that are against people who really need the help. Medications can help you to exercise your trauma. It can help you manage your trauma. But once you stop the medication, what happens? All the symptoms start running after you again. So we need the human empathy. We need the therapeutic alliance. We need long-term therapy. People remirroring, revalidating, reprogramming our dysfunctional self-regulated system. And before we know it, we realize that we are not being subjected to the compulsion to repeat, bringing people that will continue to maintain the emotional addiction of a high cortisol level. With regard to the narcissist husband, is beyond this the scope of this question and answer. What I want to say is that for you to transform your trauma, you cannot continue to be re-traumatized through cohesive control or through a narcissistic, egomaniac, over-controlling personality style. It's not going to help you to be able to recover from trauma. So that is that. So let me just check to see whether we have one more two questions before I go. I know it's over time now. We've gone over our time, but I hope you are enjoying it. If you are finding this very helpful, can you just say something? Otherwise, I'm going to stop right now. Or just give me a nod. Give me a nod. Yes, yes. Good, good, good. So good, good. One more question before we finish for today. Is it possible for a child who's gone through multiple traumas and struggles with anxiety, depression, and disordered eating to make full recovery? So is it possible for someone who's been multiply traumatized, somebody who's gone through repeated and prolonged childhood trauma to fully recover? Absolutely, it's possible. Talking about full recovery, it depends on what you mean. Childhood trauma is extremely complex. People might not totally fully recover, but they master their own emotion regulation. They're able to use their remainder symptoms, whatever their weaknesses that might be created, as wisdom to help other people. So they can actually achieve their potential. They can self-regulate. They can gain control over their OCDs. That's very common in that cohort, and they're very they can regulate their own emotions and foster positive relationships in the environment, provided there's enough help. Childhood trauma requires what we know as the secure base. Childhood trauma requires a good enough secure base. What does that mean? A good enough therapist, a good enough parent, a good enough friend, someone who could mirror back to you a lot of things that you've missed out in your developmental, it's part of your developmental deficiency needs that have been missed out on because of the situation that happened. Until we are remirrored, and this takes time. It takes time, and we have that secure base, just as every child requires a secure base. It's very tough. It's very tough. We have to basically repair the initial relationship. We have to come in to serve as a surrogate mother. That could be a therapist. By the way, long-term therapy studies have shown to be very important to people with multiple complex trauma. Complex trauma starts from childhood. If you have childhood traumas, that's complex. You're more likely to meet the criteria for the International Classification of Disease, ICD 11th edition, on complex PTSD. The DSM-5, they're still considering to include that, but the International Classification of Disease has already taken the initiative to create a different category for people with multiple and prolonged traumas, especially from childhood. So that is that. So ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. I hope this has been useful. We're going to have another session on the 15th next week from 2:30 again, 15th of April. If you know anybody at all that might be useful, that might find this useful, they have the questions for me to answer, please. This is my own way of contributing to the issues that we face today. Perhaps you can get some energy, you can get some motivation. You could transcend the constant state of fear, of shame that could kind of limit people at this time. And if you want, you can rejoin next week. It's the 15th of April. It's the same time, 2:30. I thought I'll make it 2:30 because almost nobody knows what to do by 2 o'clock between 2 and 3 at this time. You've done everything, and you kind of like you're going through that blood sugar depletion. So now I could help you put that back up. Okay, so please share this and let other people know that while Oladipo is answering questions, if you find this useful, you could help other people also to make things to access this platform. Now, if I show you, we have a whole bunch of other things, especially those of you who have issues with OCD. I want to show you around our website. If you have time, actually, I'd like to do some meditation for you, but I would say, now this is our website right here. And if you go to the blog, to the blog menu, you see that I've been busy helping people, creating some content that could help us. I was interviewed by a podcast place a while ago that you could listen to that. Now you could listen to this podcast. It's me talking about how we can protect ourselves against the COVID-19. Now this is what I'm talking about. I especially made this for our followers. This meditation to ease COVID-19 OCD and anxiety. I use a special two witnesses technique. And there's a lot of work that I've put into this to help us to go deeper, to be able to transform our OCD and anxiety. So if you are a therapist, if you click through this, you will be able to download the entire script that I use. Look at this. Look at this right there. Download the script. Download the script for this meditation. So the script that I used, you can download it and you can use it to help your clients if possible. And I would recommend you to have a go on this. Somebody told me, just asked me a while ago that why did they make it 45 minutes? We don't have time. And I said, well, I thought about it, but I realized that we're on lockdown. We're on lockdown. If you really are serious about change, early in the morning or late at night, go ahead and do your bit. Go and reprogram your entire brain system and your subconscious mind towards greater control against your anxiety at this time. And at the time, and this time is very difficult. In fact, our local radio station got to know about this. The BBC radio leads, and they played some of this about sometime last week, some parts of this meditation. So we're thankful for that. And look at it. There's the podcast one that you can just download here. In this one, I said a few introductory words. But if you want to go direct to the meditation, just download this and keep it handy for your bedtime or your work time. Now, I've got a whole bunch of other things that you could do. You could use on our website. If you're a therapist, you're looking for CPD courses. We have a lot of, if you go to online courses, we have some online courses that if you want to know more about some of this brain science, I've just spoken to you about a whole bunch of courses, online courses that you can take. And you can request your CPD, your certificate of completion. Now, we've just published the Healing Trauma. Some of you have attended our trauma course. This book goes deeper. I've just finished this, and it's available for download. The hard copy is in print at the moment. So we have a whole bunch of other things. If you look at the events, these are some of the upcoming online workshops, online webinars upcoming online webinars that you could also join if you fancy. There are a whole bunch of things that could be useful for us at this time. So it's Wale Oladipo. If you've missed these at all, if you've missed these days, they's been broadcast live on Facebook. I don't think I'm recording it. I wanted to record it, but I must have forgotten. I'm recording that. So all the very best. Go and take that meditation and get started. So it's one of the check it out. Thank you so much. Hopefully some of you will join us also next week if you want. The same link will work, and hopefully we'll get through the questions that we have not been able to cover today. And if you have other questions based on this subject, you can just email me, just reply the reminder that I sent to you today, and we'll get it going from there. It's Wale Oladipo signing out. All the very best. Let's keep going. Thank you very, very much. All the very best. Thank you. Bye-bye.